So, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Welcome to this webinar on our IISS report, which we entitled Space Capabilities to Support Military Operations in the European Theatre. I'm Ben Schreier. I am the Executive Director of the IISS Europe Office and also the Director of Strategy, Technology and Future Conflict at the IISS. And today I'm joined by two of the authors of the report, Dr. Alexander Bolfras, who is the head of our Strategy, Technology and Arms Control Program, and Esther Sabatino, who is a research associate in our Defense and Military Analysis Program. In a minute, they will both be making introductory remarks of about 10 minutes each before I will then moderate a Q&A session. To very quickly introduce the topic for today's discussion, in the fall of 2021, the IISS Europe office convened an international workshop in Berlin where we discussed the military ambitions in space, including from European allies. And we published that report only a few weeks before Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. And my sense at the time of holding the workshop was that European allies, with the exception of France, still very much lacked the sense of urgency, political will, and the resources to really seriously invest in space capabilities for military purposes, despite the fact that a lot of analysts and business groups in Germany and elsewhere pointed to the importance of doing so, also in order to reduce the reliance on the United States. Fast forward, everyone around this table, this virtual table, probably will agree that the Ukraine war has painfully demonstrated these dependencies, not just for Ukraine, but also for European allies. And the Trump administration's threats to cut Ukraine off from access to these assets and to even reduce, if not cease, its defense commitments to NATO Europe has only made European investments in space assets more urgent. But could we in Europe reduce this reliance quickly? What are the trends? What has been the progress made? And what are some of the persisting challenges? That is very much what we wanted to look at in this report, which I think is very timely and seeks to make a contribution to this debate. Finally, a quick word of expectation management. The report is mostly focused on strategic, political, and commercial provider dynamics rather than technical aspects. So I would very much ask you to direct your questions and comments towards these areas. So without further ado, thank you again for joining today. Looking forward to the discussion. And Esther, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ben, for the introduction. So in IISS report, which was written by Chelsea Willey, my colleague Alexander Bolfras and myself, we indeed looked at the ongoing conflict in Ukraine to understand how much has changed when it comes to the use of space in military operations, and what are also selected European countries doing to cope with this changed situation. So in this sense, we analyzed the policies and approaches of France, Germany, Italy, and Sweden. I won't enter into any details of the policies on these countries, as my colleague Alexander will guide us through it. But in the report, we also looked at the intergovernmental cooperation, not only for the selected countries, but also at the more broader European level. And despite cooperative activities and efforts to strengthen these national capabilities, European countries are still very much dependent on the US for the provision of space data and services. And so we decided to focus the last part of our report on the US approach, particularly when it comes to the integration of the power sector. So this was our approach to the research, and what we can see now on the slides are our main takeaways of the research. So So let me guide you through some of the analysis that we did. So when it comes to the military use of space, there has been in the last years an increased trend of militarization of the sector that can be identified in the nation recognizing space a contested domain, but also leading to the development and deployment of dedicated military space assets. The strategic utility of space in conflict is particularly relevant when it comes to the geolocation, the monitoring of troop movements, as well as the assessment of the battlefield through the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or ISR capabilities. But we also see that space can be used for other military actions, for example, when it comes to the use of GPS-guided weapons. Of course, satellite communication ensures uninterrupted command and control, and all these aspects have been present in the conflict in Ukraine. The conflict in Ukraine, however, has also highlighted another central point, which is the fact that military operations can now be performed in space as well, in the sense that space infrastructures have become the target of military action to gain advantage in the battlefield. The conflict has highlighted some known vulnerabilities, but we also saw the repercussions of these vulnerabilities. For example, conducting cyber attacks on ground-based infrastructures. That was the example of what happened right before the invasion, when the VSAT systems that were used in Ukraine have been attacked by Russia. But there are also other vulnerabilities that need to be taken into consideration when we talk about the military use of space, such as, for example, the threat posed by RPO, rendezvous and proximity operations, or the potential use of DA asset capabilities, as well as the collision with space debris. So these this group of threats actually led to the further acknowledgement of the fact that to mitigate such vulnerabilities, there is a much more pressing need for the resilience of architecture, as well as for having redundant systems to ensure and maintain the operational continuity. In this, the commercial sector played and is playing quite a relevant role, particularly in the case of Ukraine, for the provision of satellite images and communication as well. So these involvements prompted, so to say, a re-evaluation. We saw that there was a re-evaluation of policies at the European level up to a certain extent to better integrate these commercial capabilities into the national defense strategies. Coming at the intergovernmental level and at the cooperation that is performed at the intergovernmental level, I would say that our analysis showed how much space has been characterized in the last years, actually in the last decades, by international cooperation at the EU level. And that's a clear trend as well on increasing cooperation to improve capabilities. Cooperative activities occurred both at bilateral level, but also at the wider European environment. These activities actually are to have partnerships, for example, to pool resources and expertise, or to enhance collective capabilities. And they can be framed according to the specific countries under consideration. They can be framed into wider cooperative agreements, such as, for example, the Quirinal Treaty between France and Italy, or they can also revolve around specific activities and programs. So the typologies of cooperative activities also can be quite broad. There can be co-development of systems. That was the case of the development of the joint development of the Atenas feeders, as well as the Sequel 2 systems, or cooperation may see the reciprocal tasking rights of different national systems. There can be also specific activity for a joint detection of assets, of targets from the merging of data coming from a national activities. Access to space is an area of cooperation at the European level, but it is also an area where strong potential improvements can be performed. We saw that in the last years there has been a strong reliance on Falcon 9 for the launches for European capabilities. Now with Ariane 6, there may be a reduced dependency towards the US supplier, but definitely is an area where improvement can be performed and would be beneficial at the wider European level. On the policy development, we saw a trend of increasing action. From the first EU space policy that was published in 2007, there have been many developments. Galileo and Copernicus became operational between 2014 and 2016. We saw also that in 2021, the European Union developed its own EU agency for space program, or EUSPA, which is an agency under the management of the Directorate General for Defense, Industry and Space, and that streamlined the management not only of Copernicus, Galileo, GovSatcom, so ongoing initiatives, but also inaugurated very important further initiatives, such as, for example, the SSA, so Space Situational Awareness, cooperation, or the framework of the development of the IRIS² constellation. More specifically on the military domain and on the acquisition of space data, the SATCEN, so the Satellite Center of the European Union in 2023, provided for the first time classified geospatial intelligence services to member states. And this is just one of many examples of the highlighted change of the importance of space for security and defense, which was, of course, enshrined in the 2023 EU strategy for space security and defense. But what has been done so far for the joint development of military capabilities? So as we can see in the next slide, we have had a snapshot of how much of the EU defense budget is dedicated to space, and particularly to capability development for the space sector. So under the European Defence Fund framework, in the period 2021 to 2023, 304 million euro were allocated to space in this period, and the 2024 calls foresaw a total allocation of an additional 50 million to space. However, this number does not represent the totality of the allocation of projects, of fundings for the different projects, as other projects, for example, for the improvement of SMEs in the sector can be related to space, but that part of money is not part of the wider allocation. So activities actually also are happening in the framework of PESCO, for example, but did also happen in the framework of the precursor programs of the European Defence Fund. And in the slide here, you can see a kind of a trend of increased number of cooperative projects from 2017 under the PAD framework up to the 2021-2023 EDF projects that has increased substantially. That is also a reflection of the importance of the space sector for the European Union for defense and security. And I will now leave the floor to my colleague for the second part of the presentation.
Hello, everyone. Thanks to Ben and Esther for getting us started here. I have a slide to accompany my part of the presentation, which is to talk through some of the national policies and ambitions among individual countries in Europe. And you can see that the countries illuminated in blue are the ones that we covered in the report that we're launching here today. And following that are some additional European countries where we're working on a supplemental analysis as well that will be published soon-ish. So I just wanted to preview that a little bit because it does help us get a bit of an overview of what the individual national capabilities are and the direction that they're heading in. Of course, the last line in the graphic there is the United States. So just as a point of comparison to where Europe stands in relation to the US. So, one thing that's important to note here is that the United States, of course, has been making a lot of progress in the space defense sector by drawing on a pretty vibrant commercial industry in the United States. And Europe also has a pretty respectable space industry that, of course, is smaller and more fragmented than that of the United States. But there are quite a few innovative companies that are working in different nations. And the scale of public and private backing is, of course, much smaller, although the European Commission and the European Space Agency collectively support around 5,100 space-related companies, and that includes pretty early-stage startup outfits. And in terms of kind of private sector backing, they've collectively raised around $7 billion in venture capital. So on the whole, there's not as much public and private backing for the space sector in the United States. And that, of course, is then reflected in what the individual countries are able to do. So I'll go through some of those, starting with France, which is really the most advanced country in Europe in the space defense domain. And that was kind of ahead of the curve in 2019. It already formed a French Space Command. And it's the only one that is working towards a robust active space defense capability by aiming for around 2030 there and stressing active surveillance and resilience for its space assets. It does have a nice range of capabilities, intelligence satellites, including optical observation satellites, satellite communications networks, and of course, as Esther already previewed, it has the RNS-6 launch vehicle that provides independent access to space. But of course, that was meant to have a launch today, which was postponed without much of a reason given. So maybe that's cause for concern there. And the French Space Command at the moment has around 220 personnel, and they're trying to scale that up to around 500 this year. Generally, what they're kind of looking for in the future is to really focus on national sovereignty when it comes to space-based intelligence, and is also looking to deepen partnerships with commercial actors, following a bit the American example there, especially when it comes to optical communications and nanosatellites. Moving on to Italy, which is also quite ambitious. It set up its Space Operations Command in 2020, based on some of the recommendations from its 2019 National Security Strategy for space. And so far they have around 50 personnel. Well, it began with 50 personnel in the first year, and it's trying to grow that as part of the broader Joint Forces Operations Command. The Italians, some of their key capabilities are focused on satellites for Earth observation and secure communications. And it also is, it has a medium lift launch capability. Like the French, the Italians are working to strengthen their sovereign satellite capabilities, and are also working to grow their industrial base, and is also exploring the potential to expand their launch operations. Moving on to Germany, in 2021, the Bundeswehr Space Command was set up, aiming for around 250 personnel. Germany already operates some ISR satellites and is working on its SATCOM capabilities. And we were so very close to having a space security strategy under the last government, which was nearly finished, but was not released before the government collapsed. So presumably that process will be starting anew under the next government here. On the whole, Germany is quite committed to expanding its space capabilities, but as in all kind of defense matters, faces budgetary limits and challenges across the board. But Germany is also quite active in a variety of multinational efforts, especially data sharing frameworks. Another interesting country that we looked at was Sweden. It joined the group of countries that have dedicated defense and security space strategies last year, and it's working towards a broad portfolio of space assets according to that strategy. It is going to be hosting mainland Europe's first orbital launch site, and it's also working on strengthening satellite communications as one of its marquee projects. And it's trying to position itself a little bit different from the others here, in particular as a responsible space partner, very norms focused, and it's emphasizing Arctic and Baltic regional security needs as it builds out its space doctrine and activities. I'll just briefly mention the UK, which we didn't include in the original report because there we were mostly focused on EU countries, but the UK is also worth mentioning. In 2021, it established a Joint Space Command, and it also has a National Space Operations Center that combines military and civilian personnel to protect against space threats. It had released a defense space strategy in 2022 that really emphasizes that space is to be integrated into all defense operational domains. And the UK is especially focused on space-based ISR and is planning to put up a constellation of satellites and ground systems for ISR by 2031. On the whole, it is investing around £5 billion in satellite communications and £1.4 billion in new space capabilities and technologies, and is quite active through NATO in its Starlift program towards developing more space launch capabilities across NATO. So on the whole, we, over the last couple of years, have seen a shift in the perspective among these European countries from viewing space assets as something that is in a supportive function for other warfighting domains to seeing space itself as a strategic and operational domain. And on the whole, the emphasis remains on building sovereign systems, on creating resilience, and also exploiting synergies between defense and commercial partners. And one of the important international partners for this is still the United States. Several European countries conduct data exchanges and joint projects with the US, especially focusing on space situational awareness and communications. So a lot of European countries are part of the US Space Command's Operation Olympic Defender. And there are a lot of bilateral dialogues among European countries with the United States on interoperability, shared standards, and technology transfer. Of course, these European countries are also operating through NATO, which recognized space as an operational domain in 2019. And there, most of the activity is voluntary data sharing among allies. And so you have nations like France, Italy, and others contributing their satellite assets on a voluntary basis to these NATO frameworks. What's really interesting is that through these bilateral channels with the United States, or interacting with it through NATO, European countries do gain access to advanced US capabilities, but also important lessons learned, because the US, of course, was several years ahead on things like integrating commercial providers for things like launch capability. So that's an opportunity to learn best practices, but also to align standards, norms, and potential crisis responses for various space scenarios. So in sum, as I've described across Europe, many of these states are scaling up their military space structures, anywhere from new commands to building new satellite constellations. These countries largely benefit through data sharing agreements with the United States, which is generally a positive thing. And of course, this approach among most European countries of emphasizing their national capabilities offers a kind of selective independence from the United States. But if the political imperative these days is to have a collective independence from the United States, there's a lot more that can be done to establish foundations for pooling capabilities and making the most use of shared resources. And so one way that Europe can pursue that kind of a path is to put more effort into integrating commercial space technologies. At the moment, there's still a lot of regulatory hurdles, fragmented policies across the continent, and of course, some difficult security risks are involved when bringing in private entities into national security missions in the space domain. So I'll leave that at that for now, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Esther, and thank you, Alex, for starting us off. So we now have about 33 minutes for Q&A and your comments. So please use the chat function, and I will then be selecting questions and comments. And while you are thinking about your questions and comments, let me just maybe start off with two questions. One is that the report concludes with this projection that, and I quote, that qualitative advances in European space capability can be expected in a mid to long-term timeline. Now we are all aware of the urgency. And so my first question would be, how many years are we talking about, and are there any ways to maybe accelerate these programs, developing a European space capability if there was enough political will? And my second question is that, as you have shown, only France is working on full range space defense capabilities at the moment. Again, against the backdrop of Ukraine, against the backdrop of greater uncertainty about the role of the United States in European defense, would more European nations need to work on defense and space capability? So maybe we start with those.
I can start with the replies. So on the first question, I think this is pretty much a political question, in the sense that, of course, we saw that since the Munich Security Conference, a lot has changed, at least in the rhetorics at the European level. So I think that in more broader terms, when it comes to ramping up, the capacity of European countries to be able to defend themselves. This also includes the space sector. we can see already that there are some signs of increased attention towards this end. Particularly at the EU level, there have been some remarks from the Space and Defense Commissioner Andrius Kubilius when he called for the development of a European space shield as one of the flagship projects, so to say, to be developed in the next future at EU level. He also called for the development of the EU space single market to enable this kind of activities. Again, what is missing at the moment, I would say, is on the one hand, the financial allocations, the proper financial allocations. The EU currently spends on space around 2 billion a year. Of course, the EU is not the only actor that has to increase spending in this sense, meaning that also member states have to increase their financial allocations for the further development of space capabilities. But then the timelines that are also included in the space strategy for the moment are looking at a timeline of at least 5 to 10 years, according to the different lines of action. We may see the development of this, the achievement of these deadlines probably at a higher pace, given the international pressures. One point that is related to your second question, of course, there is a diversification to be done on the typology of countries in Europe, in the sense that we can also see that there is a trend of countries, particularly those that are approaching space from the last years, that they want to, of course, to focus more on cooperative activities, and the same willingness is present also for the major European spacefaring nation, although, as Alexander mentioned, in the different national space strategies and policies, the focus is on developing first their own national capabilities. So here, actually, there is a tension that may cause difficulties for the development, for the advancement of a European solution, in the sense that requirements need to be aligned. And once there is a requirement, once there are aligned requirements, so to say, then there may be a speedier development of these capabilities. But as you said, if there is no clarity, no clear message, so to say, on the policy level, then there may be the problem of actually implementing the policy directions.
Thank you, Esther. I'll just add a few notes to that if that's all right. So as part of the research for the report, we went to Washington, D.C. and had a lot of conversations with the space community there. This was under the previous administration, so that was a different outlook on the world. But we were asking U.S. Space Force, U.S. Commerce, and kind of others involved in building up American space capabilities, what kind of advice they would share with the Europeans, or what kind of advice they do share with the Europeans on replicating some of the successes in the US. And usually it would boil down to saying that Europeans would need to be more risk acceptant and more flexible in their regulatory approaches as a way of quickly scaling up their capabilities. And I think that's really what would be needed to move on a faster timeline than the one that the Europeans have laid out for themselves in their space strategies. Because at the moment, I would kind of assess that if there were no war in Ukraine, and if there were a traditional transatlanticist administration in the United States, then one would softly applaud the Europeans for taking space seriously as a domain, and that they're doing nice business as usual improvements to their national capabilities. But it's clear that the sense of crisis mode has not yet landed in the space domain and the responses by Europe as a whole. So yes, it could be that one would need to be more risk accepting in some investments and more flexible in the way one procures technology. And of course, on the issue of integration of commercial providers, there's still this focus among European countries on getting technology from firms that are headquartered in their own countries, right? Rather than viewing Europe as a whole as a source of reliable suppliers that should be supported and that could contribute to the common defense. And yeah, I think maybe just the really big picture question here is that we all accept that Europe needs to be increasing its defense spending, its defense capabilities across the board. And then the question is, how much of that should be allocated to space as opposed to a lot of the other deficient areas? And so I guess one place that I think our analysis points to is that it's absolutely critical to build up ISR capabilities in particular, because that's kind of what you need to understand the operational picture. And if the United States were to take away a lot of that capability, the Europeans would be kind of encountering a much darker operational picture than they have available to them right now.
Thank you. So good to see that a few questions are now coming in. While you were speaking about some of the challenges, can you maybe also address one of those questions posed by participants in the virtual room, which was on the legal question? You know, what kind of alignment would we need, or are the legal frameworks for operation in space, you know, as fragmented as the general landscape that you have been describing? So maybe we take that question, and then another question which was on the risk for commercial companies, given that Russia and China have declared any commercial system legitimate that is used for defense purposes as a legitimate target. Do you see commercial companies you know, being a bit reluctant investing in this space, given that threat, or is just a risk that they would have to take? So the legal question and the China-Russia risk for commercial operators.
Thank you for those questions. On the legal one, I think here there are several aspects to be taken into consideration. So satellite technology for surveillance is of course something that is extremely relevant for the conduction of military operations, as we were mentioned before. And actually, at the moment, at the European level, as the person rightly mentions, there are so many different national approaches. At the moment, at the European level, there is also a lack, so to say, of regulatory aspects related to space, in the sense that space laws are mostly non-existent. There are space strategies. There is the slow development of space strategies, particularly for the security sector. So this is something that still needs to be developed more properly among member states. This spring, there will be the publication of the EU Space Act. At least it's expected to be published in the next few months. The scope of this legislation is, of course, to find the common base ground for the further development of what national laws should focus on. In here, however, there are some aspects that should be taken into consideration because when you regulate a sector, you should do that in a way that enhances and enables also the further cooperation with international actors. There are at the moment already some regulations that are, for example, the NIS2 directive that is not specific on space, but that it can have repercussions on how cooperation on specific parts, specific type of cooperation in the space sector can be developed. For instance, this was one of the remarks that we received during one of our interviews with the US counterparts. On the second question, the role of the private actors in conflict. Of course, it has changed substantially. We saw that it can cause actually so many problems, and that can be also an aspect to be regulated. Questions like in how much time does the private company provides the information? To whom does the company provides the information after that it has shared with the first client, so to say? Or what kind of security considerations are needed to be taken into account when having these contracts with the private actor is also something to be looked at. But the provision of redundant or data or data as a secondary source is also profitable for the private companies. There are some risks, but so far, let's say that the benefit of getting contracts from the ministries of defense of the different countries has been outweighing the risk. Given that so far there has not been any direct attack to space capabilities. Of course, there were jamming attacks, there were cyber attacks, but that is something that also happens outside of the military, the proper military security and defense realm.
Just a little bit of final spin on where Esther left off. It's I think there's a lot of inspiration to be taken from the cyber domain for private actors there, where for the longest time, whether these private firms were interested in Russia, China, whether they were interested in war or not, Russia, China, and war were interested in them. So there has been over the last couple of years a really interesting learning process for private sector companies who have been under attack by some of these malign actors that I think some of the companies considering being involved in the defense side of space could take some valuable lessons from.
Thank you. Taking two more. One is on Germany, not least given Elon Musk's backing for the AfD, but I think more importantly, or even equally important, the reliance on Starlink. So the question that has been posed is, would space become now much more of a focus for Germany, and where would those German companies or the German space capability development go to, if not Starlink? Would that be French companies? Would it be German companies? What are the options, so to speak? And the other question relates to what you, Alex, mentioned, that collective independence as an objective for Europe. But obviously, this is a very highly sensitive and classified sector. So what are the options for European countries themselves developing much stronger interoperability and basically information sharing in space, particularly for military operations moving forward? Or will it just be focus on national capabilities where you then decide what to share and not to share, which obviously then becomes also a question of literally life and death in a real world military operations? Maybe these two sets of questions, and then we can move forward. Do you want to start, Alex, and then?
Sure, yes. Happy to. Yeah, so I'll take the second question first. I think the framing of the question gets at the dilemma really nicely, and especially this idea that if we continue in this paradigm of voluntarily sharing data, is that something that can be relied upon in a crisis moment if it is not properly institutionalized? And I think there the answer is pretty clearly no. So I do think it would be nice to see more of a common operational framework for data transfers that are agreed to at the highest levels and that are thoroughly institutionalized among national capabilities. So of course, as is true across the board, NATO doesn't have its own assets. These are contributions from the member states, but maybe one possibility to explore there is in light of these really exceptional circumstances that Europe finds itself in, if it wouldn't be possible to give more, to hand over some operational control to NATO for some of these core data collection and sharing platforms. I think that could be one way of ensuring greater interoperability over the long run. Yeah, and then German space capabilities, Starlink, and all that. I mean, I think it's really unclear at the moment. It seems like unfortunately, Elon Musk has kind of sullied the brand of what innovative private companies can do in space, for reasons that don't have that much to do with the actual operations of Starlink. Right? We of course saw some examples of Starlink not supporting the Ukrainians when they needed it for their operations, but on the whole. Starlink itself has not been a bad actor. It's more the owner's political activities in Germany. But I think I'll leave it to Esther to talk a little bit about where she thinks German space capabilities might be going.
Yes, thank you. Well, actually, it is extremely too early to do any potential assessment of what the next government would likely do, in the sense that we still have to see how the coalition government will be formed, and so also the priorities and the approach of the coalition government. There is also another question when it comes to Germany, actually, which is how effectively the defense budget would be able to be maintained at a high levels. Because of course the Sondervermögen is going to be exploited quite soon, and then there will be a discussion is going to be needed actually on how much budget is going to be available. In the space sector, however, there has been, I would say, an increasing attention in the last years on how relevant it is for Germany to finally invest in it. So what I would suspect is not a U-turn on this policy priority, but of course also the national landscape of space companies and space actors should be sustained. But of course, it's a matter of how much of available budget would be there as well.
Thank you. So I've got a question not specifically to the 4 case studies that you looked at in depth, but the UK, and maybe whether you guys could elaborate a little bit more on what might be coming down the line in regards to the UK. I would also think that maybe adding to this, if there's not so much more to say about UK planning, maybe you might want to focus a little bit on those other countries on the slides that you haven't touched upon, namely Spain and Norway.
Sure. So I guess like a lot of other European countries, the UK is in the midst of a very serious review of its defense policy and has very serious funding constraints on it. Of course, one thing that is different about the UK is that a good chunk of its defense spending goes into its nuclear deterrent. So that takes up a lot of the money there. Same is true for France, of course. But it does mean that a lot of its defense budget is already spoken for. But Ben, I'll kind of take your invitation to talk about some of the other countries that we're looking at, that were represented on our slide there and will be in our forthcoming supplemental analysis. So I'll start with Spain, which it has acquired an air and space force that has become operational just over a year ago, and that oversees military activities for Spain. It already picked up on the trend of commercial integration in its 2021 national security strategy, and generally emphasizes situational awareness, tracking, and preventing collisions in space. And yeah, it's generally interested in space as an operational domain, although of course in terms of capabilities, it's not quite where the others are that we've talked about so far. And it's being quite proactive in trying to get private sector contributions to its capabilities, and has a call of about 70 million euros to seek capabilities from the private sector. Another really interesting country is Norway. It set up an armed forces space department in 2016 already, so it's was a bit of ahead of the curve there, and it has been working with SpaceX to launch its broadband satellites to focus especially on some northern polar communications there, and its long-term defense plan from last year also really talked a lot about space and focusing especially on laser communication technology for data transfer to satellites, and it has a spaceport under construction. So that'll be the first operative continental European spaceport. So that's a lot going on for a relatively small country there. Poland also set up a space agency in 2014 that is mostly focusing on deploying Polish satellite systems. And one of the satellites that Poland is putting up are two French military ISR satellites, plus a receiving station that they are hoping to have operational in 2027. So it's working on that. Interestingly, Romania also has articulated an objective to become a regional leader in the space industry, but the details there remain undefined so far, and it's thinking of acquiring Starlink, back to that topic, for its communications in its armed forces. So there is quite a bit of activity and interest all across the continent, which does give us some scope for hope that Europe is heading in the right direction.
Thank you. Esther, did you want to add to this, or?
No, I think Alex depicted well.
Good. Since we don't have any further questions in the chat, maybe let me ask you one final question from my end. So what I'm hearing is that, and reading the report too, that you are, pointing out that there is greater activity that still remains fragmented, though that the jury is still out. And so my question to both of you is, if you were to be cautiously speculating, which is always a bit challenging, but I invite you to, where is this development of a greater European strategic autonomy in this domain heading? What would be your sort of cautious outlook, shall we say, the next 5 years? Because obviously we do not have the luxury of long time frames anymore with everything that is going on. You know, what would need to happen? So what is your assessment?
I can probably start with this question. I think that we have clear signs of actually where the development is heading when it comes, for example, to the Iris Square constellation. So the project is to have an infrastructure for resilience, interconnectivity, and security by satellite. That's what the Iris Square stands for. But the constellation will be formed of almost 300 satellites, and it is a multi-orbital connectivity that provides also secure connectivity for member states. I think that this is a major development at the EU level. Also, in a way, as a reaction of the need to increase the activities in the sector in few months' time, more or less in 9 months' time, which usually we would say it's a long time, but for the European processes it is not. The EU was able to agree on Iris Square, and by 2027 there is the goal of reaching the full operational capability of the system. I think this is important because it is going to be used for governmental applications, for surveillance, for example, for border surveillance, but also for crisis management and so on and so forth. Here again, I think the potential hurdles would be to find the right balance between what is the political will with what are the national interests, because of course this program is going to be implemented by companies from the participating member states, and so the difficulty there is to find what is really agreeable and to then arrive to the top performance of the system. The further development, a further development that I think is needed, and that is mostly, I mean, it's at times disregarded, is on the diversification of the supply chain and on having a strong supply chain in that regard, which includes not only access to material, but also access to technology, the right people, the ability to maintain that kind of personnel, which of course it's something that needs quite some time. So I would say that in next 5 years, for necessity, cooperation will increase, but yeah. As I said, probably the risk is to look at the specific programs and then needing to have that kind of deregulation in some cases and regulations on the other, that are two processes that require a lot of time to go through them at EU level.
Thank you. Alex, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you all for the great questions. So I guess one thing I'd put out there that's more on the pessimistic side is that I think we'll be lucky if around 50% of the timelines that have been articulated in these various national space strategies are actually delivered on time. Yeah, one way through which that can happen is if these European countries get much more serious about bringing in some of these private sector actors, which of course includes higher risk, but that's probably the only way of moving towards greater self-sufficiency. But fundamentally, over the next 5 to 10 years, it's really hard to see Europe really standing on its own as a collective autonomous actor in the space domain. So it really doesn't have a choice other than to keep the United States involved in European security, at least in this domain. We do have cause for optimism from the first Trump administration, where the space domain was handled fairly apolitically and fairly capably. And so far, it doesn't seem to have come up as a friction point between the second Trump administration and its European ostensible allies. So I think as long as the Europeans are still able to rely on US data in particular, that will allow it to focus on some of the other areas in the medium term. That, of course, is a somewhat frightening scenario. Produces a lot of vulnerabilities, but I think that's the best that Europe will be able to do in the interim.
Thank you. And on that happy note, we have reached the hour. Thank you to everyone online for joining and participating in the conversation. Thank you so much to Esther and Alex for walking us through the report and answering the many questions. Last point for me is that to say that the IISS will continue to further build its analytical capability in space-related military issues. So watch this space. So thank you very much again, and I wish you a nice day and looking forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you and bye-bye.